Mina glances around the old bell tower. This place, the rookery, had been her home once. Now there is nothing here save for dust and memories. She glances down at Valerian, who, aside from some very effective cursing, is making an overall piss-poor job of repairing her complex innards. With a particularly colourful verbal flourish, he hurls his spanner at the floor in a fit of pique. It bounces back up and catches him sharply on the shin, triggering a fresh torrent of invective. Ow! Bloody hell! I swear I give up. Damn it, Montesario. I'm a diplomat, not a technomancer. Why can't you do your own blasted repairs? Mina might have sighed had she had the breath to do so, but in the absence of lungs, she satisfies herself with sass. Because for at least the 10th time, I can't see into my own torso, and these hands are too clumsy to hold delicate tools. Though, in your case, I might make an exception long enough to toss you out of a window. Oh, and while we're at it, what happened to OPSEC? Ixnay on the Ainsnay, remember? It's clearly too late for that. Digby, who had been sitting quietly hugging his knees ever since their arrival at the safe house, and looking for all the world like a man slipping into deep, deep shock, is suddenly looking up at her, eyes wide. Montesario? Mina Montesario? You're in there? You're her? Well, bollocks, Valerian mutters, turning away, and as a result, he completely misses the slow smile that spreads across Digby's face. Thank the seven, Digby grins. Mina Montesario, you're exactly the person I need to speak to. Hello and welcome to The Lone Adventurer, an actual play solo RPG podcast with me, Carl White. I will be your narrator, your game master, and your guide as we follow our heroes on their journey into the unknown. For this game, I will be using the Daggerheart rule set, as well as a variety of other systems, tools, and tables as they take my fancy. A word of warning. The following scenes may contain mature themes and disturbing imagery. Listener discretion is advised. The adventure continues. Last time, on The Lone Adventurer, Valerian attempted to snatch Digby Algaric from the streets of Kairos in order to gain intel on the unseen conspiracy. But the Whisperer's secretary was well protected. A fierce street battle ensued, during which Mina, in the body of her steel defender Barbican, went toe-to-toe with a full squad of close protection guards. Valerian was able to convince Digby that his emergency teleportation device was in fact a bomb, and the trio fled through the city's underbridges, pursued by the guards. After a desperate chase, they leapt onto a passing cargo skiff, leaving the furious Sergeant Stern raging at their escape. Welcome back. I began this episode with a short rest for my party, allowing me to explore the Daggerheart downtime rules, and my PCs to clear a bunch of accumulated hit point, stress, and armor damage. The rest also granted the GM 4 fear. I then levelled Mina and Valerian up to level 2, which will provide them with some new moves, as well as some much boosted damage output. As mentioned last time, I intend to level the PCs up fairly rapidly, all the way to mid-tier, but rather than start at, say, level 5, I'm finding that starting low and working my way up is giving me a gentler introduction to the rules, and a better grip on what my PCs can do and how their abilities interact and synergize. Next, I checked in on my scene expectations. My plan had been to interrogate Digby, but the simple oracle had other ideas. It doesn't work out that way, but, it informed me. That suggested my expectations had been somehow subverted, but in a manner positive for the PCs. To understand exactly how things were changed, I consulted my deep oracle, drawing 2 tarot cards. The 7 of Pentacles, reversed, spoke of impatience, a lack of progress, or disillusionment. The idea of a bickering Mina and Valerian came to mind. Then the 6 of Cups. This card relates to innocence, joy, and memory, and again my immediate gut reaction told me that this meant Digby was actually pleased about this situation. And so it would seem we face a rather different situation than the one I had planned. Rather than an interrogation of a hostile witness, it now appears as though Digby wants to talk. I've no idea why, but I'm keen to find out. A jumped-up, self-important, officious little job's worth of a bureaucrat with the interpersonal skills of a parking warden he may well be. But there is one thing that you can say for Digby Algaric. He does follow the rules. Meticulously. Obsessively even. So when an organisation begins to flagrantly break its own rules, it would do well to keep a close eye on men like Digby Algaric. "It's a disgrace," the little man is protesting, warming to his diatribe, his face flushed and arms gesticulating wildly. "A travesty. All pretence of adherence to operational protocols and due process have been wholly abandoned. I had my concerns, of course. Who doesn't in our line of work? But as a consummate professional, I kept them to myself. Even with the ever closer ties being forged with the machine cult, with shipping of ever greater quantities of infernal powder to the front lines, I did my job to the absolute best of my abilities. What diligent service to House Montessario could do less?" Mina swallows a contemptuous response and waits him out. "And what was my reward for my faithful service? What boon did the Whisperer grant me for all my years of devotion to the House of Whispers?" The little man spreads his arms wide, an expression of mortified outrage upon his chubby features. "Exclusion, removal from the heart of things, banishment to mere operational duties while the Whisperer surrounded himself with new confidants. I found myself under observation, my every action tracked, accompanied at every turn. It contravenes every established organisational norm, and it is nothing short of an absolute travesty." He pauses for breath, his rant temporarily spent, and Mina wishes she had teeth to grind. There it is, laid bare. This prissy little functionary, outraged not because of the crimes of his organisation or the numerous fatalities inflicted by the Civil War, or even the unimaginably greater number that the bombing campaign might engender, but instead because of his organisation's lack of trust in him. On the face of it, this is bad news. If what Digby says is true, he is unlikely to have the information that she wants. He sits outside the unseen conspiracy that she is certain has taken root at the heart of the House of Whispers. But 2 things give her hope. Firstly, he mentioned a set of new confidants. They surely must be linked to the unseen, may in fact be representatives of that shadowy body. And secondly, the protection unit, the EED. Those levels of precaution suggest that Digby is an asset worthy of protection. They suggest that even if he doesn't know it, he holds secrets that Alexis doesn't want revealed. Putting aside her profound distaste for the man, she sets to her questions. To kick the debrief off, I ask the GM a fairly obvious question. Does Digby have intel that he wants to share? This seemed likely, and indeed my oracle confirmed that he did, but it was a qualified success, a yes, but. Once again, I turned to the deep oracle, and this time I drew justice and the 3 of cups reversed. The first of those represents fairness, ethics, and accountability, while the second represents isolation, excess, or exclusion. Well, when combined with what we know of Digby and a little bit of PC extrapolation, those concepts came neatly together in my mind to form the scene that we've just heard. Simple enough, really. This scene used none of the Daggerheart rules, but I had so much fun with them in the last episode that I'm keen to get back to them and put them through their paces once again. Which gives me an idea that ties in very neatly with one of my principles for the lone adventurer. Play where the fun is. Let's see if my virtual GM agrees. Remind me again what my role is in this suicidal debacle? Valerian asks, though he already knows the answer full well. He is backup, interference, an opportunity, however unlikely, for them to try and talk their way out of any trouble if this goes sideways. When, he corrects himself, when this goes sideways. Based on all prior experience, the spiralling of this mission into catastrophic clusterfuck is surely only a matter of time. Mina ignores the question, instead performing final self-diagnosis while strapping her arcane pistol to her thigh. The weapon, which had seemed enormous in her human hand, seems almost like a child's toy when attached to Barbican's metal bulk.
And mine?
The Doomspire has been silent so long, Mina had almost forgotten it was still in here with her. Its question is a wholly unwelcome reminder. "Stay quiet, stay out of the way, and let me do my job," she answers, though it's not clear if she is responding to one or both of the questions. "Ready?" She does not wait for a reply. She twists the dial on the EED that a panicked Digby had continued to cling to throughout his escape, and which in turn triggers the bulkier device that she has jerry-rigged for Valerian. Reality warps around them, causing Valerian to fervently regret having dinner before departure, and then it reasserts itself. Only now, their surroundings are changed. Gone the sparse stone walls and bare boards of Mina's bell tower room, along with Digby's anxious face. They are replaced instead by a somewhat threadbare carpet, dark oak panelling, and, hanging in their gilded frames, dusty portraits of dusty spy masters from times long past. They stand in Alexis Montessario's office, in the heart of the House of Whispers. Mina has been in this room on more occasions than she cares to remember, and it occurs to her now, on pretty much every one of those occasions, she had a reason to regret it. "You know," whispers Valerian, sitting himself on the desk and glancing nervously about, "your secretary's story about possible secrets in a safe seems a pretty thin basis upon which to take a risk like this. I really hope you know what you're doing." Mina cannot deny a twinge of anxiety herself. Digby, despite lengthy questioning, had proved disappointingly vague when it came to details. Yes, he had revealed that there was some sort of significant disagreement between Alexis and his new confidants, but he had no knowledge of what the disagreements had been about, or even who the confidants were. He had, however, provided the location of Alexis's safe, within which Digby was reasonably sure the answers could be found. As Valerian points out, not unreasonably, it is pretty thin. But despite all that, this remains their best option to gain insight that they need into the Unseen's plans. "It's a bit late for regrets. Digby said the safe was behind the painting of Orrin Crane, the first Whisperer. Stay behind me and keep quiet, and with luck we'll be in and out before anyone knows we're even here." She reaches for the portrait. And naturally, that is the point where everything goes straight to hell. Once again, no Daggerheart rules for this scene, but I think it is safe to say that we'll be seeing some use very, very soon. For now, we had a series of oracle questions, which set things up nicely. First up, I asked, what else does Digby know about the unseen conspiracy? My tarot draw gave me the Two of Swords, signifying decisions, convictions, and hard choices, as well as the Five of Wands, which is all about conflict, disagreement, and competition. It was no huge leap to go from there to the conclusion that there was a disagreement about an important course of action between the Whisperer and his advisors. I asked if Digby knew what the disagreement was, and with 50-50 odds, he didn't. But there was a positive. I decided that he did know where the Whisperer's safe was, and that this was where he was likely to keep that information. Next, we had an important question that, in hindsight, I think I probably shouldn't have rolled for. I asked if Digby had kept his emergency evac device. Now, if this had come up as a no, I'd have had to figure out another way to get into the House of Whispers, which might have been a challenge, but thankfully I got a yes, and I decided that that meant Mina could have it work on both her and on Valerian without a further roll. And then my final oracle roll was to see if they managed to avoid triggering countermeasures. This one seemed unlikely, and sure enough, I got a no, and the deep oracle here gave me the Ten of Pentacles regarding home, shelter, and stability, along with the Knight of Swords reversed, which means restless, unfocused, and aggressive. Let's see how that manifests. Valerian feels the desk shift beneath him. He leaps to his feet, eyeing the heavy oak furniture with suspicion. What the hell? Then he releases an involuntary squawk as the desk's squat little legs brace and then begin to propel the heavy piece of furniture furiously towards him. He dives to one side, avoiding being trampled by inches, but Mina is not so lucky. The desk slams into her metal back with a resounding clang, sending her cannoning into the wall and then stumbling back dazed. She topples to the ground with a crash.
Damn it!
Mina growls, struggling to get back to her feet.
Animancy! Valerian, you concentrate on getting the safe open. I'm going to turn this desk into kindling. Ah!
She clutches her hands to her head, going down to one knee again, trying desperately to ward off the high-pitched whine that the desk has started to emit, with limited success. The safe? Fine, just keep that thing away from me. With his attention firmly fixed on the belligerent bureau, Valerian entirely fails to spot the eyes of Oren Crane beginning to glow a deep, malevolent red. The desk, it seems, is throwing everything it has at Mina. A drawer flies open, and a lacerating arcanic blast narrowly misses her, carving a deep gouge into the wall and ceiling before shutting off. Another drawer opens, this time releasing a cloud of sparking, crackling gas that sends Mina's metal body into spasms. Valerian, meanwhile, has turned to the portrait. Mina? Should its eyes be glowing like this? He stumbles back as twin beams of arcanic fire lance out from the eyes, searing into his chest.
Enough!
Mina bellows and brings both weighty fists down on the desk with a splintering crack.
Valerian, stop messing about with that portrait and get the safe open!
Messing about? You call this... Ow! Messing about? I'll have you know I gave up a perfectly good retirement to join you on this half-baked excuse of a mission. The least you could possibly manage is a little gratitude. Ow! The portrait blasts him once again, forcing him back. Hell's teeth, I can't even reach the bloody safe, let alone crack it. Mina continues to pound away at the desk, but it continues to give as good as it gets, surging forward and knocking her from her feet once more. Mina's metal frame is bent and dented in multiple places, her innards charred and sparking from the caustic magical gas. She is not sure how much more of this Barbican's chassis can take. The office is in absolute pandemonium, but over the din, Valerian is sure that he can hear shouting coming from outside the door. "Mina, I think we have company." "Who knows? Perhaps it's our allies, come to save us in the nick of time. What do you think?" The door is kicked in, lock splintering, and Sergeant Stern, backed up by a pair of burly guards, comes barreling into the room. Whatever Mina might have had to say on the subject is lost, as her battered and blasted body finally goes down under a hail of stun baton blows. The lights in her eyes go out. That last scene has taught me a lesson that I had already begun to suspect the truth of from the combat encounter in episode 1. There is definite skill involved in GMing Daggerheart well. The way I've built my PCs may also be a factor in how tough that last fight proved to be. Although Mina is pretty good at soaking up damage, she can only do so for so long. And the fact that Valerian is very much focused on social abilities meant that in this fight, in particular against a construct, he was a lot less effective. Neither PC is built as a high damage dealer, and so in both battles I've struggled a little to gain the upper hand. My party fled the first battle, and Mina has gone down, reduced to 0 hit points in the second. We'll come to the consequences of those events in good time, but for now I want to focus on the mechanics of the encounter. This scene was built using the battle point encounter building rules. For a standard combat encounter, you get a budget of battle points equal to the number of PCs times 3 plus 2, which gave me a budget of 8 points. I decided that the Battle Box, a solo Tier 2 enemy with a budget value of 5, was a great starting point, and an easy reskin into a magically animated desk. And then I used the Chaos Skull, a Tier 2 ranged opponent, for a further 2 battle points. That meant I'd spent a total of 7 points, and I stopped there to go for a slightly easier fight. Only that was no easy fight. I mentioned that this may partly be down to the way I built my PCs. I think I'm going to have to revisit them to see what might be tweaked, assuming they live long enough to get into any more scrapes. But there is only so much that I can do here. Valerian really is not a combat specialist after all. The high challenge may also be down to me playing my PCs slightly suboptimally. Valerian only made 2 rolls in that battle, both of them to access the safe, and both of them which turned out to be failures with fear. Could I have made better choices? Well, that's entirely possible. But I think the real reason the fight was so brutal was down to the way it was run from the GM side of the table. The way that the GM spends fear in Daggerheart, and the moves that they choose to take, have an enormous impact on the difficulty of the encounter, both in terms of the number of fear spent and what the fear is spent on. The GM moves in Daggerheart are intended to be much more varied than just spotlighting adversaries and smacking the heroes repeatedly. The GM is provided with a suite of soft and hard moves that they can make that are far more focused on building out the fiction of the fight than on directly damaging the PCs. I did use several of these other moves along the way, rolling for random soft moves when the party succeeded with fear, and for random hard moves when they failed with fear. Things like signal an off-screen threat, or make a move that characters don't see, or show collateral damage. But looking back at the rules, I realized I overcooked things by quite a bit. I used a lot of hard rules, where softer ones might have been just as interesting, and perhaps even more appropriate. In hindsight, there were a ton of things that I could have, and probably should have, done differently. I spent 7 or 8 fear in that combat, which, according to the rules, is the budget for a major or climactic battle. I should probably have been a bit stingier with my fear spending, as well as a lot more varied with my move selection. And so I've made some fairly major tweaks to my solo rule set that I'm using for this game. Tweaks that mean that move selection is now better aligned to the rules and guidelines laid out in the rulebook, and fear spending is tied to the budget commensurate with the intended encounter difficulty. You can find a link to the current version of those rules in the show notes if you'd like to take a look. This try, iterate and try again approach is very useful in playing a solo RPG. You get to test drive the system before you unleash it on your players, and you get to see exactly how it plays out in reality. You get to make your mistakes, hone your skills, tweak the settings of the dials, and get the one thing that teaches you better than 100 hours of reading the rules: you get hands-on experience. With all that said, regardless of what I've learned and the many mechanical considerations I'm working through, from a fictional perspective, my party are now in pretty hot water. They are surrounded by a ton of bad guys, and their only real combatant has been felled. How will they get themselves out of this latest pickle? Well, I hope you'll join me next time to find out. You have been listening to The Lone Adventurer, a solo RPG podcast played, written and performed by me, Carl White. If you've enjoyed this episode, please consider telling your friends about it or leaving a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts. It really is a huge help. You can follow me on BlueSky at theloneadventurer.bsky.social. Email me at theloneadv@gmail.com or follow my blog at carlillustration.wordpress.com. You can find show notes for this episode and all others at theloneadventurer.podbean.com, where I include any links mentioned in the episode, as well as mechanics information. I also include a link to a full episode transcript. The story will continue in the next episode of The Lone Adventurer. Thank you for listening.